Namaste, everyone. I'm Sunita Vishwanath, and I'm so excited to welcome you to Hindus for Human Rights' third monthly Baithak for Liberation. Our online discussions are designed to critically explore what it means to imagine a Hinduism rooted in love and liberation in our contemporary moment. Our Liberation Baithaks bring together scholars and practitioners to examine the ways Hindu traditions and teachings can infuse ordinary lives with the tools we need to connect religious practice with a commitment to justice in the world. Our Baithaks also seek to invigorate our nascent work on a liberatory Hindu theology for our times, and that's through our new initiative, Samadarshini. Baithak is a Hindi and Urdu word for a sitting and generally implies an intimate gathering for intellectual, artistic, and spiritual exchange. Since we aspire to brave difficult conversations and hold space which might feel uncomfortable and challenging, I invite everyone to keep an open and questioning mind, listen keenly, and be ready to be transformed. It's important to note that the views expressed by our speakers are always their own and do not necessarily reflect our official position in Hindus for Human Rights. Our deep wish is that our liberation Baithaks bring us closer to liberating ourselves and our minds from assumptions, stereotypes, misconceptions, misinformation, dogmatic thinking, and as a result, bring us closer to each other. Our first Baithak in February delved into the complexities of Swami Vivekananda's teachings and thought, and what lessons they might offer us in our present day endeavor to resist and defeat Hindutva. And our second Baithak last month in March, which was Women's History Month, was a discussion with two progressive and anti-caste panditas who are at the forefront of challenging Brahminical patriarchy by transforming Hindu ritual. Today's Liberation Baithak, honoring Dalit History Month, will explore how Babasaheb Bhimrao Ambedkar's thought can illuminate both a valid critique and a liberatory horizon within the Hindu tradition. We all know that Dr. Ambedkar spent his life fighting caste and working to build legal and constitutional protections for caste oppressed communities. At the end of his life, he abandoned Hinduism and embraced Buddhism, along with hundreds and thousands of his followers. He was famously and vocally skeptical of the possibility of anti caste reform within the Hindu community. However, in several places, including his famous treatise, Annihilation of Caste, Dr. Ambedkar stated that Hindus who do have the will for anti caste reform would not have to look beyond the teachings of Vedantic texts, such as the Upanishads, for the requisite resources. This is really the starting point of Hindus for Human Rights. We are those anti caste Hindus that Ambedkar was addressing. The truth is, caste is not going to be annihilated without masses of Hindus rejecting caste. This conversation goes to the heart of our entire endeavor. We are anti caste Hindus, but how do we annihilate caste? All three of our speakers today serve as beloved advisory board members of Hindus for Human Rights. Moderating today's Baithak is Dr. Murli Natrajan, Murli to us, who moderated our inaugural Baithak in February, and we are thrilled to have you back, Murli. Murli is professor of anthropology at the Department of Community and Social Justice at William Patterson University in New Jersey. His research is on group formation and social inequality, especially caste and race. Murli's journey to anthropology has been from the high seas as a marine engineer on Indian merchant navy ships. Dr. Natrajan's books include Culturalization of Caste in India, Identity and Inequality in a Multicultural Age, and a co-edited volume, Against Stigma, Studies in Caste, Race, and Justice, since Durban. He has written numerous other scholarly and popular articles and texts. Currently, he is completing a collaborative book titled Toilet Theory, which is on how technology and social policy shapes human behavior. Murli is also actively engaged in solidarity work on South Asia in the USA. I'll hand over now to Murli to introduce our two esteemed speakers and take the conversation forward. Thank you so much, Murli.
Thank you so much, Sunita and HfHR for this opportunity. And a very good afternoon to everybody. And this is indeed an opportunity to think and plan collectively about an important question. Can Hindus annihilate caste? And by way of moving into our Baithak and exercising my privilege as a moderator, I offer a more grounded version of the same question. How can one be a Hindu and be anti-caste? Not just not be casteist, but be anti-caste. This question allows us to identify three basic challenges, two substantive and one strategic. First, how do we substantively understand caste? This is not simply an academic question. Caste is a historical, socio-economic, and cultural political phenomenon that emerges in certain parts of South Asia over the second and first millennium BCE and continues to adapt itself to changing conditions from there on. It is both material and symbolic, and it changes its form. It is a structure of power, kinship, and wealth appropriation, as well as a conjuncture of status claims and events that shape any period in historical time. Like all oppressive structures, caste needs regular legitimation. That is, structures do things to people, and some people, usually the ruling classes, justify or legitimize the doings of the structure. Over time, some more people start believing in this legitimation. But there are always those who do not. Hence, the work of legitimation of an oppressive structure is never ending. Here is where religion, chiefly Hinduism in the form of Brahminism, comes into play. But there are also non-religious ideologies that also legitimize caste. My own work, for example, has identified culturalization or culturalism as a key non-religious ideology of caste in current times. It legitimates caste. Another non-religious legitimizing ideology of caste is Sanskritization. And there are several others too. So the first point, which is substantive for us, is that it is critical to not mistake caste for its legitimizing ideologies, be it Brahminism, Sanskritization, culturalism, or anything else. Caste exists along with a range of legitimizing ideologies. This allows us to, if we don't make that mistake of confusing one for the other, this allows us to acknowledge how and why caste is a pan-South Asian phenomenon. It varies across ecological agro-eco zones and it cuts across religious populations. So that's the first substantive point from the framing question. The second substantive point is that again, we also need to be clear about Hinduism. It is the chief, but not the only ideological legitimation source for caste. Uh, the task is not to build something from entirely new elements, in our case here with HfHR, uh, or to look for new sources, but actually build from existing Hindu sources. This requires exploring standard elements of Hinduism, Brahminism, and others to see how to intentionally excise or erase or exclude or debunk those elements from a theology, ethics, eschatology, and practice of being a Hindu. In an earlier Baitak, Swami Medananda had offered a set of core Hindu beliefs based on Ramakrishna and Vivekananda's teaching. There he had been clear that belief in, for example, karma, guna, and reincarnation is not necessary to be a Hindu. Today is a good pointer. Today that is a good pointer to all of us, and it offers certain questions. What are the elements of Hinduism that legitimize caste? What does it mean to be a Hindu without these bulwarks? How can Hindu build that religion of principles that Ambedkar called for instead of a religion of rules? The devil is in the details for sure, and I'm sure our speakers today will get a little bit into that at least. My final point is that the framing question for today also brings up its strategic value. Why are we doing this work in HfHR? I've heard from HfHR members about facing flack, actually from allies, for even daring to imagine such a project. Some mock the effort by dismissing Hinduism as irreformable. Others mock the effort as not radical enough. Apparently, for them, only seeking to end religion itself is the only worthy goal. To both, I would say, it is easier to critique than to reform and rebuild. It is easier to call for annihilation than to do the work of annihilation. It is easier to engage in wishful thinking rather than build relations and change ways of being. Neither critique nor calls or wishes constitute strategy. The question to be faced is who benefits when there is a significant number of Hindus who are intentionally and consciously and continuously against caste and patriarchy? Who loses when such a critical number of Hindus do not exist? History has time and time again shown us the importance of the existence of sections of the dominant community who fight back on its own oppressive traditions, who do not allow oppression in their names or on their behalf, who stand up to the rise of cruelty, colonialism, civilizing attempts, corruption, and all forms of coercion and corrosion from within their own communities, creeds, and castes. Dalits cannot annihilate caste on their own, as Anand Teltumbde's early work has boldly declared. Neither can Muslims resist Hindutva on their own, nor can women defeat patriarchy on their own, and so on. So, society benefits when Hindus realize how degrading caste is and how caste is tied to the hip to patriarchy. There is therefore everything to be gained in HfHR continuing this struggle despite the naysayers. There's nothing wrong in seeking to rebuild what it means to be a progressive and justice based liberatory Hindu. This is your battle, our battle. Every other faith is doing the same kind of work. We are privileged today to have two deep thinkers with us, starkly different in their areas of research and yet critical together to be in conversation for our project. Dr. Anand Teltumbde, an ex-CEO of Petronet, an ex-senior professor at IIT Kharagpur and Goa Institute of Management. In addition to having an illustrious career in his formal disciplines of technology and management, Anand has had a parallel career as a civil rights activist, columnist, author, and public intellectual for people's movements. As part of his activism, he authored 33 books as of now. Every day it seems to be going up, Anand, and numerous articles spanning a wide range of subjects related to left and Dalit movements and varied issues of contemporary importance. His most recent book is Iconoclast, a reflective biography of Dr. Ambedkar. And Dr. Teltumbde, or Anand, as he's fondly known, was arrested in the infamous Bhima Koregaon case and held as a political prisoner along with 15 others for 31 months before getting released on bail. This case was fabricated by charges by the government as part of its strategy to silence opposition to its anti-people policies. Welcome, Anand. Dr. Anantanand Rambachan is Professor Emeritus of Religion, Philosophy and Asian Studies at St. Olaf College. He is also co-president of Religions for Peace. Rambachan has been involved in the field of interreligious relations and dialogue for over 30 years as a Hindu participant and analyst. He is the author of several books, including The Advaita Worldview, God, World and Humanity, Theology of Liberation, Not Two is Not One, Essays in Hindu Theology. His writings include a series of commentaries on the Ramayana. The BBC transmitted a series of 25 of his lectures around the world. He's a member of the Hindus for Human Rights Advisory Board, as is Anand. Welcome, Anantanand. The organizers have designed our session today as a Q&A. They've also been kind enough to send us some prepared questions in advance. I thank them. So here goes, and we can take the next half an hour to hear from both of our speakers about the particular questions for them. Dr. Rambachan, in your scholarship, you demonstrate that one can reinterpret Hindu theology towards liberation for all in this life. How do you respond to persistent arguments and justifications of caste from within the tradition? What are they, and can Ambedkar's critique help us here? Over to you.
Thank you very much, Murali, and thank you for such a thoughtful framing of our discussion and our challenges as we confront the oppression of caste. So it's a great honor to be here, and I come in with special humility, partnering with Anand in this conversation. Not only is he a prolific writer on these issues, but as Murali mentioned, Anand has also been paying a very high personal price for his activism and for his stand for justice. So I appreciate all of that, Anand, and I come, as I said, with great humility to join you in this conversation. As far as your question, good question, Murali, is concerned, I think that one of the unfortunate outcomes in our present context is the continuing defense of caste from within the Hindu tradition. And I have surveyed these arguments, and I can speak at great length and identify these arguments. But I just want to lift up three. I will not name the source of these arguments except to say that these are all from prominent contemporary Hindu defenders of caste. And I find it very insightful also that Dr. Ambedkar anticipated all of these arguments, even decades ago, and responded in great detail to these arguments, even though they persist in the writings and lectures of prominent Hindus. So let me quickly, mention these three. I selected three of the arguments that I find commonly repeated as a defense of caste. The first one is the division of labor argument. And here is a summary of this argument from a very prominent Hindu publisher and writer. It's a very lengthy, I just have an excerpt from it. So here I'm quoting now. People everywhere divide themselves into castes. We have workers, you go to work, you work under somebody else. That happens all over the world. That's the Shudra caste. We have merchants who are self-motivated. That's the Vaishya caste. We have the politicians and the lawmakers and the law enforcement people. That's the Kshatriya caste. And you have the priests, the ministers, the missionaries. That's the Brahmin caste. Every society has these castes working within it one way or the other. In today's world, if one is not fulfilling the dharma of his born caste, then he changes caste. For instance, if a Brahmin husband and wife are working 8 to 15 hours a day in a hospital, on the others, they are no longer of the Brahmin caste. They are no longer performing the duties of that caste. They are workers in the Shudra caste. That is a legitimation or defense of caste. And I think Dr. Ambedkar responded to this argument by reminding us that caste traditionally is not merely a division of labor, as this person presents it. He repeatedly mentioned that caste is a division of the laborers, not merely of labor, but a division of laborers. And this division, as he mentioned, unlike what this writer has mentioned, this division is not innocuous, as this suggests. It is a hierarchical and unequal division based on norms of purity and impurity. And in addition, the division is not based on any kind of natural aptitude, but on the notion of hereditary work. So it's an argument that he dismantled, an argument that attempts to present caste as a fairly innocuous arrangement of labor. The second argument that I want to lift up, again, very prominent, and this one is actually comes from a contemporary scholar of the Hindu and Jain tradition. And here's what this person has written, and I'm quoting again. It is rarely observed that the social hierarchy is not just limited to Hinduism, but it stays intact in any Indian religious society. Buddhists, Jains, Sikhs, Christians, and Muslims have their own caste hierarchies and restrictions. Even Western societies have their own classes and groups. Thus, it is indeed a social phenomena which is not just limited to Hinduism or to India. End of quote. Now, it is true, as you said, Murali, that caste is not limited in South Asia or elsewhere to the Hindu community, that it has spread to Sikhism, Jainism, and even the Christian and Buddhist communities in South Asia. But as Dr. Ambedkar, repeatedly mentioned in his writings, that the significant idea is that these other traditions have not treated caste as a sacred order legitimized by religion. So for Dr. Ambedkar, it is dangerous. It's a dangerous delusion to take comfort in the mere existence of caste among other communities without caring to know what place caste occupies in their life and whether there are other organic, as he put it, filaments which subordinate the feelings of caste to the feelings of the community. So one might add that the presence of the social hierarchies in other communities it should never be a comfort for us when we are talking about caste. Citing the existence of caste in other communities is too often given, as this scholar does, without acknowledging the brutal injustices of the system wherever it occurs. And so the third argument I will lift up, Murali, before ending this response, I think it's, again, perhaps one of the most prevalent and maybe even least challenged contemporary defenses of caste. And I would probably label it as the character versus the birth argument. And here is a well-known Hindu Swami, a Hindu monk, defending caste with this argument. So here's what he writes. He says, and I'm quoting, that the Varna system was based on a person's characteristics, temperament, and their innate nature. So he's arguing for what we would call the guna theory. The Vedas describe one's nature as being a mixture of the three gunas, tamas, rajas, sattva. And depending on the relative properties of each of these gunas, one would be classified as Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, or Shudra. These gunas are not inherited. They are based on one's inherent nature, one's karma. Therefore, one's varna was also supposed to be based on heredity. And in the past, it was not. End of quote. Dr. Ambedkar spent a lot of time in his writings contesting and dismantling these arguments and related arguments. Unfortunately, as I said, his arguments are still not heard. They need to be heard by those who too uncritically envisage a guna version ordering of human society. So quickly, because Dr. Ambedkar has given a very, very detailed response to this guna defense of caste. And he interrogates, unlike this argument, he interrogates the necessity for labels because the Guna theory preserves labels, and he interrogates the necessity for labels such as Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra. He argues that the names Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra are names which are associated with a definite and fixed notion in the minds of every Hindu, that of a hierarchy based on birth. And his view was, as long as these names are maintained, we will not get rid of the hierarchies of impure and pure, higher and lower, embedded in the terminology itself. And then he had more pragmatic responses to this argument. For example, how are you going to compel people who have acquired a higher status based on birth without reference to their worth to vacate that status? Will they recognize those who are currently classified as lower on the basis of birth but who deserve a higher status? In other words, he's interrogating them. How would you enforce your argument? And another part of his response was that questioning the very ideal of a fourfold classification of human beings. He says, that the diversity, richness, flexibility of human nature make it impossible to classify all of us into four groups. It is not possible to pigeonhole human beings into these categories. And the final response of his I'll mention is that this argument makes groups unreasonably dependent on each other for the fulfillment of their vital needs. Groups suffer when other groups do not pursue their vocation or fail to fulfill their responsibilities. And there he highlighted the particular vulnerabilities of those who are classified as Shudras, since the Shudra is prohibited from knowledge, from wielding arms, from education, and so forth. So how can the fact that his neighbors are educated and armed help a man who is uneducated and disarmed? So these are still morally very prominent and public arguments seeking to legitimize the system. And I have just shared also, some of Dr. Ambedkar's very poignant and powerful responses. And these arguments are very easy to find in Hindu literature, unfortunately. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was a very comprehensive response, and I think you hit on some of the key ways in which, from within the Hindu tradition, these arguments are consistently made and many times just tacitly agreed upon. So, Dr. Teltumbde, your scholarship compellingly illustrates the ways that caste oppression persists through adaptive strategies, including co-optation of Dalit symbols and iconography. In this context, tell us about the potential pitfalls or ideological risks in building an anti-caste Hinduism. How may we guard against this kind of a project becoming yet another iteration of Brahminical dominance and just re-articulating some parts of it through the language and aesthetics of being a progressive? So just tell us how you would rip into this project, because I think it's important for us to hear a trenchant critique of this from you in terms of what are the guardrails we should have.
Yeah. Thank you, Murli. I appreciate, Hindus for Human Rights taking up this kind of issues, anti-caste Hindus. If it had happened before something like 1927, Ambedkar also is looking forward for Hindus who were really anti-Hindus. But after Mahat Satyagraha, he changed his stance and almost concluded that annihilation of caste is impossible unless Hindu Shastras were dynamited. That means the destruction of Hinduism itself was required for annihilation of caste. So that was his argument. Later on, of course, this thing was rooted in a sacral notion of caste, that everything of caste was rooted in Hinduism. And this stemmed from the ritualistic aspects of Dharma Shastras. But later on, the way he evolved, he did the politics and fought for many kinds of safeguards for Dalits and reservations and separate electorates and so on and so forth. And ultimately, of course, in line with sacral conception of caste, he renounced Hinduism and embraced Buddhism. That's all known. So later kind of political endeavors of Ambedkar could be classed as something like an associational. So maybe that Hindus, anti-caste Hindus would have been welcome, or Ambedkar would have been very, very happy to welcome them before 1927. In between, he would not just believe that this is possible. And later on, the certain aspects, his political battles, etc., actually indicate something like an associational notion of caste. And again, he might welcome such kind of notion. So this way, but there are many pitfalls as I see in this project. This could be taken as aspirational movement, and one may not be against it, but it has this kind of intervention has many challenges. And there are pitfalls and contradictions. Some of the things that I could list out would be something like sanitization. It actually tends to sanitize Hinduism's structural role of caste. The risk is that by promoting anti-caste Hinduism, these movements may downplay or sanitize the foundational role Hindu scriptures and institutions have played in promoting and legitimizing caste hierarchy. A refusal to critique or disavow the Brahminical canon, that is Manusmriti, Gita, Dharmashastras, risk offering a diluted critique of caste oppression. Second, cultural rebranding without structural change. The risk is that there is a tendency to reframe caste as a social aberration rather than a systemic religious political order, reducing anti-caste struggle to symbolic acts. For example, temple inclusivity or reinterpretation of rituals, etc., not inimical to Hindutva view. It risks depoliticizing the anti-caste movements and ignores the radical anti-Brahminical stance of figures like Ambedkar, who called for annihilation caste, not as moral reform. Third, upper caste moral leadership and saviorism. The leadership of such movements often comes from upper caste diasporic Hindus, which can reproduce dynamics of moral patronage, claiming to speak for Dalits and Adivasis while not being accountable to them. Without centering Dalit, the movement may mirror liberal savior complexes rather than fostering genuine solidarity. Fourth, ambiguity on religious exit. The risk is that while claiming to fight caste, many within these circles refuse to engage with Ambedkar's call for religious conversation or critiques of Hinduism as inherently unequal. This limit the imagination of emancipation to within the fold of Hinduism, denying space for legitimate rejection or renunciation of the faith, which has been critical historical path for many Dalits. For example, Navayana Buddhism. Fifth, diasporic disconnect from ground realities. The risk is that the movement is often disconnected from lived caste realities in India or fails to engage with grassroots anti-caste movements like those led by Dalit women, manual scavengers, or anti-caste students. It can result in abstract interventionism, abstract universalism, lacking grounding in material struggles and political demands, such as reservations, land rights, or annihilation of manual scavenging. Sixth, liberal pluralism, diluting radical politics. Framing anti-casteism within a broader liberal secular humanist vocabulary, that's religious tolerance, interfaith harmony, etc., may dilute the radical critique of Brahminism and Hindutva. This may lead to moral equivalence between oppressor and oppressed groups, a la Samarasta of Hindutva forces, or fail to take a clear stand against Savarna complicity. 7. Risk of co-optation. The movement may be co-opted into multicultural new liberal frameworks like diversity, equity, and inclusion kind of frame, and and transforming caste abolition into diversity tokenism. This may be de-radicalize the anti-caste project, reducing it to shapeless rather than a transformative politics of emancipation. 8. Lack of political economic lens. The emphasis on religious reform often ignores how caste is embedded in capital, labor, and land relations, especially under neoliberalism. Without a critique of economic structures, anti-caste Hinduism risks being merely spiritual or cultural, avoiding class struggle and state accountability. 9. Inadequate critique of Hindutva. While opposing Hindutva, these movements may fail to trace its roots within the Brahminical core of Hinduism, treating Hindutva as a distortion rather than a political expression of Hindu orthodoxy. This disjunction allows a good Hinduism versus bad Hindutva narrative that lets mainstream Hinduism off the hook. And finally, ambivalence towards Ambedkarite politics. Some version of anti-caste Hinduism selectively appropriate Ambedkar as a moral figure or constitution maker, while ignoring or opposing his materialist, anti-Hindu, and political program of annihilation of caste. This is betrayal of Ambedkarite epistemology, which saw caste as inseparable from Hindu social order and called for political self-respect and rupture, not reform. In conclusion, I would say, while Hindus for Human Rights and similar efforts represent a progressive shift within the Hindu diaspora, their project of anti-caste Hinduism must reckon with the structural nature of caste, the complexity of Hindu theology, and the centrality of Dalit Adivasi leadership. Otherwise, such movements risk becoming liberal cosmetic exercises that unwittingly reinforce the very inequalities they claim to oppose. Thank you.
Fantastic. I think this was precisely at least what I was hoping we would get from you. I know that you were a little bit diffident, may I say, about what you have to say to such a group. And I am thrilled to actually get this 10-point um, cautionary note, if I can say. That's the generous reading of what Anand is asking HfHR and any Hindu who is committed to such a project to actually pay attention to. Nonetheless, Anand, I read it also as not a dismissal of such a project, but just to underscore the various kinds of pitfalls and the various degrees of tentativeness and caution and self-reflexivity, as well as what Anantanand began this thing with, of humility, to be uh, very much part of such a thing. I have two more questions, and let's actually get get to those. The next one is back to you, Anantanand. Ambedkar argued that caste is not merely an aberration within Hinduism, but an inherent product of its theological and ritualistic structures. In light of this, can a vision of anti-caste Hinduism truly succeed without directly confronting and dismantling Brahminism as a religious ideology? And this is, in a way, following up on several of the points that Anand made. So, over to you.
Well, thank you, Murali, and of course, thank you, Anand, for that all of those 10 important points that you bring forward to us in the discussion today. And I think, I just want to endorse, powerfully what you had said, particularly the reminder to us that, like race, if I would use that argument, that caste, race is not only based on a theory of ordering human beings, but it's a very deeply materially embedded structure in human communities, which it has to do with the way in which resources are allocated and distributed. So I think it's really important for us to engage with that argument that it's not simply a theological challenge, but it's also a deeply structural. It's embedded in such powerful ways in the very structures and ordering of human communities, which I think makes a challenge even so more urgent and more difficult for us. But at the same time, Anand, I think that we bring different competence to this issue. And there is also, I think there is a theological dimension to the caste system which needs to be challenged, as you emphasize, all the ways in which it is, the way it appears in politics, in economics and social structures, and so on. So in response, Murali, to your good question, here are a few points that I would want to put out. Because, Dr. Ambedkar, as we know, he was very pessimistic about the movement for dismantling caste within the Hindu tradition. And he gave a number of reasons for that. He saw very clearly that it will not be led by Brahmins, because the system works to their benefit. So he was asking, where would the leadership for dismantling caste movement come from? They're not going to work against their own interests or against the structures and institutions that granted them so much power and privilege. And then he also spoke about the very hierarchical nature of caste. The fact that it's not simply a division of labor, but, as I said, a division of the laborers, makes it difficult for mobilization, because caste ensured that each one jealously guarded his or her own rights and privileges. As he put it in one famous sentence, all are slaves of the caste system, but the slaves are not equal in in status. So what do we need, as your question asks me, to contest, to confront Brahminical power and influence. I think one of the very important, where we're not there yet, unfortunately, Murali, but we need an unambiguous acknowledgement of the inhumanity, the injustice, the multiple ways, the multiple oppressive expressions of the caste system, and as Anand reminded us, the fact that it is widely legitimized by appeals to Hindu teachings, by appeals to the tradition and its practitioners. So self-criticism, serious self-critical self-examination is a very vital need that we have. And that includes the ways in which teachings are interpreted to legitimize caste, like teachings on karma, for example. So we have to, as I started off, in my own contribution, we have to resist from apologetically, and that's still happening too much, apologetically explaining the caste system as having some kind of original noble intent that then became corrupted over the ages. That itself is a defense of the system. It's a flawed argument that there is something retrievable or noble in its original intent. And now, of course, with the rise of Hindu ideology, we have the argument that the whole system is the creation of foreign intervention, or even a response to foreign presence on the Indian subcontinent. I think we have to see it as clearly. This work requires that we see it as a very, very persistent and powerful historical expression of a system of human oppression and domination that is sanctified and legitimized by religious validation. Hindus are not exempt, even though many would like to think so. We are not exempt from the susceptibility to the corruption of power and the tendency to oppress and affirm self-value by the devaluing of others. The second point I want to make in response to your question, Murali, is that Dr. Ambedkar understood very clearly the appeal to sacred texts to justify caste, and this is why he was calling for, the abolition of sacred texts that justified this system, because this led to the view of caste as somehow as a divine mandate. And again, I lament, because we are not going to make progress in dismantling caste unless we take him seriously, unless we really study him. So, I did a project and published something, Murali, where I was looking at all the post-independence, post-1947 commentaries on the Bhagavad Gita, including the commentaries by Gandhi, with whom, as you know, Ambedkar had serious debates. And it was very interesting for me to read all of those commentaries, and particularly the commentaries on those verses that speak about, Varna. And not a single modern commentator on the Bhagavad Gita in the Hindu tradition in the last 70 years even mentions Dr. Ambedkar and his critique, in spite of the fact that he was one of the finest students of Sanskrit in his time and of the Bhagavad Gita. He's completely ignored. And when I say completely ignored, I'm speaking about commentators like Dr. Radhakrishnan and others who make no mention of his critique. So how are we going to undertake this work, Murli, if we do not take the critique of one of the finest minds in the 20th century seriously? If we're still unwilling to listen to his voice, and all of the scholars and religious leaders have completely ignored him. And I think that is where we have to begin, as uncomfortable as it is. We have to begin by listening to Dr. Ambedkar and engaging very seriously his critique of the tradition. And this is the only way, I think, that we can turn the tradition against itself, if I would put it in that way. The tradition has to turn against itself, and we can't do it without his brilliance, his critical brilliance. So I stop with those comments, Murali. There's always more, but that's enough.
Yes, yes. I think it's a. I am very thrilled at the quality of the conversation that we're having. I must be frank, and I believe that this is there in a lot of people's minds. We could have just had a very superficial conversation where we mostly don't articulate some of these very difficult, almost imbroglio kind of a situation. Uh, and so thank you so much, Anantanand. I think those are precisely the questions. I want to also break free a little bit from the script that I have been given, as lovely as the questions are. I have a fourth question, and this is to Anand. It's going to build on what was suggested, and then we'll break out for discussions because I see it's almost about an hour. So, Anand, the 10 points that you placed, okay, which is definitely going to be, I mean, some kind of a 10 guardrails to face up to the challenge, and some of them could really be debilitating or at least intimidating for most people who might embark on this and who are already embarked on this project. But I'm going to say the following, that I feel that they can be reduced to four, and those four are, the following. One is something to do with, if this kind of an anti-caste Hindu, how to be anti-caste Hindu project is moving forward, how will Hindutva in some way not just co-opted, but how will it be snug with Hindutva? So Hindutva is the first one. The second one is something about the continuing hegemony of privileged castes, or if you want to call Savarnas, Brahmins, upper caste, all various terms, but that is the second part, the continuing hegemony of those already with caste privilege, in a way patting themselves on the back and saying, yeah, now we've solved it. And the third one is multiculturalism, which is some kind of a logic of late capitalism, one can say, but there's always a later and a latest and the next form of capitalism to come. So anyway, multiculturalism in some way is in shreds, lying in shreds today in the United States and in other parts of the world, in India too, in a sense. But these are three: Hindutva, privileged caste, and multiculturalism. And then there's a fourth, political economy, or for lack of a better term, I've always felt that Ambedkar's push to think about caste as also a division of laborers can be pushed even further to say caste is also about the control of the labor process. There is something called casteized capital, and it's been like that for a very, very long time. And if you take these four, Hindutva, privileged caste, multiculturalism, and political economy, it's only the first three that are very identity based. So the big point which hasn't been introduced thus far is, what does it mean to keep Hindu identity alive? And I think this, I'm just articulating a question that is there on a lot of people's minds. Um, who wants a Hindu identity? Whose needs does it serve? When and where? And to what extent? And the reason I'm putting that out there is because if you look at the political economic battles, the battles for land rights, the battles for reservations, the battles for all kinds of economic and political and social rights, one can easily say that there are a whole lot of individuals who may think of themselves as Hindus. They may or may not articulate themselves as Hindus, but they're definitely participating in social movements for um, political economic projects. So then the question, Anand, is this: can we spell out a little bit more in some depth as to what are those liberatory projects confronting neoliberalism or Brahminical state power or capitalists, capital's um, ravages? What are those things that Hindus against caste with a sense of identity of being a Hindu would would find a problem to enter? So, in other words, is it not possible for anti-caste Hindus to simultaneously confront neoliberalism and Brahminical state power and capitalism's ravages? What is the hurdle, if anything, in that?
Very complicated.
You can answer very simply.
uh, I would say if it relates with Ambedkar's critique of Hinduism, then it is not just merely a theological critique, but it actually spanned across something like a Hindu social order. So, and that is quite inclusive of political economy. Okay. I specifically articulated about the issues of political economy, and some of the things were touched upon by Anantanand in his first thing, division of laborer, division, not only division of labor, but laborer. Those kinds of metaphor includes all those kinds of issues. But when it actually transits to neoliberalism, when from Ambedkar's times, if we actually traverse into 90s, when India adopts neoliberalism, the horizon actually widens about the anti-caste movement. And really speaking, these people have not kept pace with. So it becomes a very challenging aspect. How does one juggle with these kinds of issues? Because if you just take a referential point in Ambedkar, so he's not something like Ambedkar, then very broadly it could be taken that he envisioned the society as an ideal society based on liberty, equality, fraternity, his very fond slogan. And that includes many things like so the state socialism, for instance, when constitution was being written, etc. So on the eve of that, when he was not able to enter the Constituent Assembly, that time he created a treatise and submitted to Constituent Assembly. And again, in response to Nehru's objective resolution, in the Constituent Assembly, he again reiterated the same points, like how the justice, political, economic, and social is possible without the social structure of the society being socialist. So this kind of argument actually includes most of that. And even his, there are many viewpoints about his embrace of Buddhism also. It is not just escapism, or it looked like when he says so in Annihilation of Caste, that I do not think that Hindus would ever be prepared to dynamite their Dharmashastras, and therefore, as for me, I'm quitting. Okay, so he had decided his thing, and those who want to come after me, oh, well, welcome. Otherwise, who want to try within Hinduism, they are also they. I mean, my sympathies would be there, and to the extent possible, I would help them. So these kind of things he said. Now the question comes, uh, as you asked, is it possible to have an anti-caste Hinduism that doesn't simultaneously? So in this perspective, probably we could actually frame that question. So how anti-caste Hinduism could be sort of without confronting neoliberalism or Brahminical state power, how they could be fighting Hinduism. So that these dimensions of neoliberalism, the way the capitalist actually transform itself and and impinges upon caste. Okay, so those things need today. If you want to take a stand on Hindu meaning caste, then you'll have to necessarily confront these issues. Okay, because neoliberalism has greatly impinged upon caste and strengthened its structure to the extent that I many times spoke and wrote about it, that India today is more casteist than ever before. So it is not something like a Manu's era or something like in ancient times that caste was very strong and all. Today, the caste is very palpable reality and it's stronger than ever before. To my mind, I would simply put it like this, that it's not possible to have genuinely anti-caste Hinduism that does not confront both neoliberalism and Brahminical state power. Because caste in India today is not only a religious or social question, it is embedded in the very infrastructure of modern governance and capital. Actually, caste has muted into neoliberalism in several ways. Many things could be said about that. And I have been always speaking about that caste is not a fossilized institution, right from the whatever way it might have been born. Okay. And I'm of a firm opinion that no dharmashastras or no text can create such kind of social system. The social system came into being, and those who were in power actually legitimized it by writing the text of their kind. Okay, but you do not find a resemblance of any social sort of system of caste system in history also, to my limited knowledge. It never corresponded with any Dharmashastra or any Manusmriti or anything of that kind. It only legitimized in a broad terms. So that could be said about it. So when it comes to in transition, during Mughal, medieval time, then British colonial time, then post-colonial time, the caste has been systematically changing, and nobody actually notes the subtle changes that have come into it. So while caste once functioned through religious code, it now operates through access to education, land, credit, and jobs. Neoliberalism's promise of merit, privatization, and deregulation has only deepened caste inequalities by removing affirmative protections and pushing public accountability aside. The privatization of education and the dismantling of reservations in elite sectors have benefited dominant castes while excluding Dalits and Adivasis under the guise of meritocracy. So these are all frills, earlier times people did not feel it that way. But now these are the palpable questions that we'll have to confront necessarily. The Indian state under Modi today is not a passive administrator. The state is never a neutral entity. Again, that is notion prevalent among Dalits, and probably stemmed from Ambedkar itself. The state was taken as a neutral arbiter, which is actually, it's not. always state had its this thing. State is committee of the, as Marx says. I subscribe to that. Okay. So today's Indian state, the Hindutva state under Modi, is not a passive administrator, but an active Brahminical force. It uses cow protection laws, bulldozer justice, rewriting textbooks, and even temple diplomacy to affirm Hindu nationalist vision, where caste is preserved and justified in subtler ways. Any caste project that avoids confronting the state power ends up legitimizing the very machinery of oppression. I would say anti-casteism without anti-capitalism is an hollow rhetoric. An anti-caste Hinduism that does not engage with landlessness, caste-based wage gaps, unemployment among Dalits, and informalization of Dalit labor risk reducing anti-caste work to moral gestures or cultural symbolism like temple entry or ritual reforms, etc., while the economic structures of caste exploitation remains untouched. Even within progressive Hindu circles, there is often reliance on liberal values like tolerance and diversity, but these can obscure the need for radical structural change without confronting the source of state power and economic privilege. Such movements risk being co-opted into the very system they claim to resist. I would say anti-caste Hinduism without a fight against neoliberalism and Brahminical state power is not anti-caste, it is reformist cover. Ambedkar had transcended from his early vision of reformed Hinduism to the annihilation of caste, a vision that requires political courage, economic justice, and break with Hindu orthodoxy and Hindutva alike. So I don't think, unless we, meaning caste are not to be taken as something like ritual caste, I've been quite against the conception of the sacral caste, the caste rooted in Hinduism. That kind of concept I have been consistently against. I do not find that kind of thing in existence because that was the colonial trap. That was a colonial theory that trapped many people, including Ambedkar, you know. So the existential caste actually in Ambedkar's time also was something like a sectarian caste. Many people, it's not just a vertical hierarchy, but it was a horizontal kind of networked entity system which negotiated among themselves for this thing. And there was something like a millions skirmishes within. That was a caste, I mean, that was within the caste society. So this represented basically caste. So this to say, many people are still attached to that kind of version that is projected in meaning an annihilation of caste like thing, but they have to rise beyond and see how caste operates in probably today, post neoliberal kind of era. Thank you, Murli. That's it from my side.
No, thanks. Thanks a whole lot. I think we are at a point when we need to open it up to discussions. There's a whole lot of um, material that has been put forth. I'm just going to pick a couple from the ones that have already been put here. And Pranay or Sunita, you could also chime in and help me out here if you want. But one question to Anantanand would be, tell us a little bit more about um, uh, the the Varna Vyavastha concept and how to kind of get rid of that, because that seems to be at the base of some of these things. To that, I would definitely add some of the other things like reincarnation, guna theory, all of that, and how, for example, one or two small steps could be taken that could lead to a larger pushback on that in terms of um, Hindus doing certain kinds of Hindu practices, whatever that could mean. So that's one thing. And then I just want to uh, have Anand tackle another question. Uh, Anand, I think the question is, what is the danger of leaving the entirety of Hindu practice and theology to Hindutva, in other words? Uh,
Hmm? What the?
what is the danger of allowing Hindutva to represent Hindus? I think part of the issue one has to understand is there are Hindus who are against Hindutva, and therefore how to kind of understand the importance of that by asking the questions, what would happen if there were no Hindus against Hindutva? So I want you to focus on that a little bit, but first let's get to Anantanand.
Thank you, Murali. Let me, if I may, just preface what I want to say with just a small comment. And I hope you will agree with me on this point, because I think it's an important insight about Dr. Ambedkar. Surely, in dealing with the phenomena of caste, I think, as you know, as you have been emphasizing in your comments so eloquently, Anand, the deep structural tentacles of caste as economic, as political, as social phenomena. But I think it's, if I'm allowed to say also that, you know, as far as religion is concerned, I think Dr. Ambedkar, as deeply as he appreciated the, you know, the way in which Hindu society was structured in all of these forms, I don't think he saw, and I'm not saying this is your argument, Anand, I'm just making a broader comment. I don't think that Dr. Ambedkar saw religion itself as a kind of epiphenomena of human economic or political realities. In other words, you know, in making the case for the annihilation of caste, Murali, he distinguished himself from the socialists. You know, to the socialists of his time who were championing Karl Marx theory of economic determinism, Dr. Ambedkar cautioned them about hasty generalization based on European models, and argued, you know, for a greater complexity in understanding the sources of power. Certainly, you know, these include property and property distribution, but he also said, you know, he also spoke about religion. So in other words, I understand him also as arguing that economic reform alone does not guarantee changes in human relationships, because if the sources of power at any given time in any society includes both, you know, social and religious, then social reform and religious reform must be accepted as a necessary part of the reform. He didn't think that changing the economic conditions alone will suffice, because religion was not. I think he was a deep seeker of meaning and of truth. And this is why, you know, he didn't reject religion. When he left the Hindu tradition, he moved to Buddhism for various reasons, because he felt that it provided him with deeper meaning and was much more, it was consistent with the values which he championed. So he was not deconstructing religion entirely as an important dimension of what it means to be human. I just wanted to say that. Now, on the Varna question, a complex question, you know, Murali, you're very much aware that one of the arguments which we are having today by the defenders of caste, which is a very absurd argument, is to say that we do not have caste, we really have Varna, and that Varna is very different from caste. So it's a sort of a terminological defense of the system. Whether we use the terminology of caste or we use the terminology of Varna, what we are speaking about fundamentally is a hierarchical ordering of human beings into orders of greater and lesser worth, and as Anand has been emphasizing, with all of the structural implications of what this meant. So there is no work to dismantle caste without also engaging the Varna Vyavastha, the system of Varna, because I think the presuppositions there are very much the same, the unequal ordering of human beings, and then all the material consequences that follow. So I don't, I see the necessity of engaging that fundamentally, which Dr. Ambedkar did when he was critiquing the Guna theory, because very much Varna is, that Bhagavad Gita verse that so many defenders of caste quote, Chatur Varnam Maya Srishtam Guna Karma Vibhagasha. I created these 4 orders based on Guna and Karma, where the Guna and Varna is used. But I think that the reality is the same.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Anand, over to you.
Over to me.
So the question by
Yeah, repeat the question.
okay, so I'll just repeat it exactly as the question has been posed, if I can get to it somewhere. I don't know. Okay.
You said something like
What is the danger of leaving the entirety of Hindu practice and theology to the inhumane defenders of oppression and intolerance? By which I am reading this as, if Hindus for human rights and anti-caste Hindus were not to exist, then it would be in the hands of those who we know as Hindutva. And what is the danger that Hindutva speaks for all Hindus?
okay. Mm. Yeah, danger is obvious that is happening around. But as I said, that this probably the solution is not very elegant in sense that the anti-caste Hindus can come forward to sort of defend caste, fight caste rather. Hindu right, that is Hindutva kind, and liberal multiculturalism, which they could sort of, the way the cooptation is happening, by Hindutva forces. But that is a very limited purpose. As I would say, they have been doing it for electoral purpose, political power and all that kind of thing. Because if they co-opt, say, the Ambedkar icon, for instance, the Dalit land up, they could effectively woo Dalits to vote for them, and through them, their political power or sustenance political power could be possible. So that's a very, very bland kind of equation is there about that. Otherwise, they are not concerned with this. So as it is happening, they have other Muslims. Probably next in order would be Dalits. And that is happening already in many places, like Ambedkar statues. They have been sort of presenting themselves as Bhakt of Ambedkar, etc. But Ambedkar statues alongside are being broken, and they are keeping quiet about it. So this is, and tomorrow this is going to be a very, very dominant phenomenon. So that is there. What I would think is this symbolism without any structural change. This is addressed to probably the people who are taking progressive stance and not with Hindutva. The Hindus, they wear the Hindu identity, but still they are some way anti-caste Hindus or something like for equality kind of people. So they would, I would say that they should focus on a structural change, because what Dalit need is a structural change and not just a symbolism. Don't stop at something like Ambedkar statue or next to Ram. Demand but demand kind of redistribution plan, uh, temple control, political power, and so on and so forth. They are more important than that. Anti-caste Hinduism must be uh, materialist in practice. Materialism to me is more important than all this spiritualism and all trash. So challenging not just exclusion, but economic foundation, Brahminical dominance. uh, Disruptive capitalist nexus could be the next thing. Reject any spiritual movement and doesn't confront the corporate power with landlessness, the privatized education. All these are very, very material problems today that Dalits are facing. They are very secularly getting excluded from all these peers. Okay, like education is there. There is something like a right to education in place and everything, but the very systematically the poor people are getting excluded. The quality education is at high price. It requires lakhs of rupees for even at the school level education. And at the other end, you go to Adivasi Padas or Dalit Bastis, etc. There are no schools, and those schools are closing. Now, the same paradigm that people had to walk miles together to reach schools is coming in, because in the rationalization kind of argument, the schools are closing. Those schools are there. There is something like a single teacher schools. They do not have any infrastructure. And on the other side, the schools for the elite few would compete the best in the world. So these kind of inequalities are getting one will have to confront. The confronting caste is actually all these confronting these kinds of issues. This is going to be the test of their anti-casteism. Build people's cooperatives, libraries, meeting halls, and, and such kind of emancipatory infrastructure, not the temples or anything like that. So these issues will have to be taken up. Then the pitfall is something like good Hinduism and bad Hindutva, that kind of narrative. Many peoples are there, votaries of this kind of thing. Hindutva is not Hinduism, but all those kinds of things. These are slippery arguments. That's true. Hindutva is a political project and Hinduism is a religion, like any other. Okay, I'm not distinguishing between religions as much as Ambedkar does. Okay, but so that is a pointless thing in my mind. Reject the narrative that Hindutva is a distortion of pure Hinduism. Instead, expose how Hindutva grows from Brahminism soil. Okay. Any anti-caste Hinduism must decenter the Veda, Dharma Shastras, and Apokar gurus and entire this the moral core. Like this idiom need to be probably discarded. Then it's not just the diaspora morality, but they should be grounded in struggle. Okay, anti-caste Hinduism must align with grassroots Dalit struggles, sanitation workers, landless farmers, student movement. There are n number of movements. They are actually fighting on the ground, and how they should be worried about how they could be sort of reinforced, how could they be strengthened, how could they be helped. That kind of approach should be there, not a symbolic kind of thing. It cannot be a diasporic ethics project that preaches inclusion but avoids confrontation with power. So I would say, in short, reject outright whatever the Hindutva forces have been hankering upon, and and uh, create or promote structures that would threaten them. A real anti-caste Hinduism must be radical, not reconciliatory, one that embraces rupture, not reform, and builds community, not consensus with oppression. So that's what I would think. Probably the progressive Hindus who come with a posture that they are against caste and these kind of inequalities, they will have to take a very hard stand against what is going on in India, the Hindutva movement. And it's going on. Actually, they should fight also in America, for instance, but on such kind of issues, the approach should be tilted toward these, the actual struggles rooted in fighting neoliberal kinds of oppression and all that. Yeah.
Excellent. Very clear and good set of, it's a map one can create
Thank you.
and walk that path. And I wish to thank both our speakers very much. And I want to hand it over to Pranay. I know that there are several other questions in the chat. I leave it to you, Pranay and HfHR, to think about how best to kind of collate, and curate some of the thoughts that have come out in this. I think there's also a desire from some to get Anand's 10 points in some written form, if that's possible at all. I promise to work on Anand to deliver those goods. And Anantanand, as usual, thank you so much. It's absolutely crucial for your voice to be here. Over to you, Pranay.
Yes, thank you so much, Murli, for moderating this conversation, and thank you so much to Dr. Rambachan and Dr. Teltumbde for being here, for being in conversation with each other and with us today. I mean, I think, this, when we first conceived of the series of the Baithaks for Liberation, it was all about how can we really dig into these difficult questions about what it means to build a liberatory Hinduism on many fronts, whether that is feminist Hinduism, an anti-racist Hinduism, an LGBT affirming Hinduism. But in many ways, the elephant in the room and the most existential, fundamental question of like, what is the challenge to a liberatory Hinduism is the question of caste, because unlike patriarchy, unlike, homophobia or any of these other forms of oppression, caste is unique in it emerges out of Hinduism, right? In a way that these other systems of social hierarchy and oppression don't. And that poses a very fundamental existential question for an organization like Hindus for Human Rights that is trying to be a liberatory, progressive, justice-oriented Hindu voice. And I think what I'm coming away from this conversation with is that this is, this is obviously not a question that we can answer on a 1.5-hour webinar, and it's not a question that I think any of us came in here thinking we would answer. But I do think that conversations like this are so critical to, confront these issues head on, not skirt around them or sort of sweep them under the rug. And I really, really appreciate the nuance and the complexity that both of our panelists brought to this discussion, the grace that was shown to, what is obviously a very fraught and sensitive topic for many people. And I think this was a really powerful discussion. I know there were so many questions that audience members asked that we didn't get to. Again, an hour and a half is just nowhere near enough time. We could spend our entire lives digging into these questions. And so if you want to continue these discussions, I want to make a pitch, which I've already done in the chat, but please do consider, if you haven't already, becoming a member of Hindus for Human Rights. You can, as a member, you have access to many perks, among which is our members only WhatsApp chats that include a liberation theology working group where we have the members who are interested in these sorts of questions about what it means to build an anti-caste or a liberatory Hinduism as a religious and spiritual practice, are always engaging in rich, vibrant discussions about these and other questions. The chat always blows up, especially in the days after we have these Baithaks. And so please do consider joining. I'm going to drop the link again in the chat here. You can learn more and join at that link on our website. We will, of course, share this recording out in the next couple of weeks. We'll put it on our website and social media, as well as emailing it out to everybody who RSVP'd. So even if folks couldn't make it to the webinar live, you will receive the recording again in the next couple of weeks, along with a list of readings and resources. We'll be sure to include in written form Anandji's 10 points, as well as other writings and resources, both by our speakers and by others as well. So do stay tuned for that. Stay tuned as well for the announcement of our May iteration of this monthly series. So we'll be announcing that, of course, on our newsletter, social media, and so on. So please, if you don't already, stay in touch with HfHR. Thank you all so much for being here on a Saturday. Thank you again to our panelists. And yes, happy Dalit History Month to everyone. Jai Bhim.